Welcome back to On the Horizon podcast, hosted by Jessie Sage and Melrose Michaels. First, thank you so much for becoming a premium subscriber and supporting our podcast. This is getting you extra exclusive, unheard, and unseen footage from each interview that we have on the horizon. First, let's dive into it with Go Ask Alex.
I interviewed another woman who was telling, a cam girl who was telling me a story of the fact that like after a termination, she was bleeding for months and she couldn't work because you can't cam when you're bleeding. And she went to the doctor and she's like, I need help to stop this because I cannot make any money like this. Mm-hmm. And they were like, you just have to let things run their course, you know? And I think that, I'm curious, like if you could speak to a little bit of this, like it seems like sex workers have very particular like sorts of like concerns that aren't just about pleasure, but are also about like, how do I work in this body that I have that like medical doctors are not, they don't care about that. They're not like equipped to deal with that.
Yeah, it's not their priority. And also because there's so much stigma and shame around sex work, it's not always something you want to talk to your doctor about anyways, just because of their own potential judgments. Like my surgeon who performed my colectomy, I never had a conversation with him about sex work, about my work, because I didn't want to have to explain that to every new doctor who came into the room and all 10 medical students who would be following them around and every single nurse. Right? Like you don't necessarily want to have that conversation. Especially because of the judgment and especially because of the vulnerable place that you're already in. Like you're already scared and emotional, and it wasn't a conversation that I felt ready to have. So even aside from that, I think that regardless of whether or not someone is a performer, if they're bleeding for months and months and months, like that needs to be addressed. And if they have questions about their sexuality or the way that their illness is impacting their body or their sexuality, like that needs to be addressed by a doctor regardless of their work, right?
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that you said that, because I actually wasn't even suggesting that like you have to out yourself to have those conversations. Like, I just think if like just saying like, I would like to have this function, or like, how do we do that? And have them be like, well, you don't need that to survive. So
so dismissive of the human experience.
It's not about survival. Okay. It's about thriving, not surviving. Thank you.
I'm alive, so I would like to enjoy this life. So
even especially as a woman, right? Like where our bodies are, they somehow attribute to our value as a human too. So to have to go through something like that, like it's already traumatic enough being a woman and like being looked at like that. And
literally every day.
Your body's always front and center, whether you consented to it or not. So like to have that other emphasis in this completely drastic 180 and in, I don't know, for me, that would be very hard for my identity. Like it would take me, like I dyed my hair black once and that was hard for my identity. So to go through something of meaning and substance, like that would be so difficult to manage.
Absolutely. I mean, even think about like getting a bad haircut or like having, like have you ever been to the stylist and they burned off all your hair? Like I've been through that where like you go from like long hair to like, I have a pixie cut now because they burned it off. That is difficult. Like that is really hard. It's your body. It is so much of your identity. And I think a lot of that's regardless of gender, but especially for those of us who are, assigned female at birth, and we live and we're raised as female, and the expectation, everything in our lives revolves around the way we look. There are interactions in the world, like any interaction I have out in the world with men, with anyone, with, the way that I'm treated is so, it has so much to do with the way that I look that day and how I present myself. And if I'm wearing makeup and if I'm wearing, depending on what clothing I'm wearing versus if I'm wearing gumboots and overalls and I'm hiking my dog with no makeup on. And it's like the way that we interact in the world is so different. But I do think that since having my ostomy in the last 2 years, one of the really positive things in my work has been the opportunities I've had because of it. I mean, I decided rather than downplaying my disability, I was just going to, you know what, this affects me every day. I'm just going to roll with it. Yeah. I'm going to run with it. And now I talk about it every day, and I do lots of interviews and podcasts and writing about it. And in some ways, it's actually been like a great business decision. Yeah. I mean, in some ways, my ostomy has been the best thing that's happened to my business, because now it sets me apart and I'm seen as doing this advocacy, and it is so needed.
Yeah. Well, you
not just in our industry,
but are doing it, you know.
Next, let's take a look behind the scenes of our interview with BodyByBlunts. I think that that's a common thread I find with a lot of sex workers, is that through sex work, they kind of find a better, not always, but a better relationship with their bodies. And I share that experience for sure. And do you think that any part of, because you said you have a cam background and you do clips, that the things that you've created have helped you see yourself differently in any way?
Yes, definitely working with people who are like-minded. Selena Kills, or Selena Kyle, depending on how you say it. She is a doll of dolls, in IRL, the doll of dolls. And I remember filming with her after I was getting ready to rebrand, and she reached out to me because she found out I was coming to her city. And I was like, oh yeah, really? That sounds amazing. Let's meet and talk and et cetera. Let's meet up at a coffee shop or whatever. And we talked, and of course headed off and ended up filming. And that experience was so wonderful because she's so kind. The whole filming experience was so lovely and nice, and no pressure. And it feels like as I keep going, I'm making better choices than I made in the beginning of my career.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, that's neat. I like her. I've hung out with her before. I've never shot with her, but I've hung out with her, and she's very lovely.
Honestly, I think it's important that disabled people that are sex workers, especially if they're in an area of sex work where they have to be very public, whether they're a performer who does clips, they're a contract performer, whatever the case may be, that it takes some of us to help all of us. And the more of us that make a space for the other people by saying that we are disabled, hey, I'm a disabled performer, and making it more commonplace that these magazines and studios, etc., will look at us in the same way that they look at other people who are not disabled, that we are also viable choices.
Oh, that's very well said.
Yeah. I would like to see that.
I would too. Yeah. I think it's important. And I think that the community has to come and band together to, work with more disabled creators and make more content and make it more visible and in your face that this is our industry, and we got to love everyone, and this is what it is. And then I think studios and production might follow suit. In my experience, they don't take lead on things, but we can try.
Yeah.
It'd be like that. I don't necessarily want to do contract work myself, but I know that there are disabled people who do.
Yeah. I'm curious, it's something that came up in our previous discussion as well when we were covering the topic of disability and neurodivergence, was that a lot of the resources out in the sex work space really don't cater to that community or that segment of sex workers. And this is very striking for me because there's this whole ecosystem, and I'm certainly a part of it myself. And now that I'm having these conversations, I realize this about putting out, content or courses, which is where I'm saying I'm part of this problem, that say well, if you just do it this way, run your business this way, but that doesn't apply to someone who's not able-bodied or who has a disability that they're working with. And I'm curious if you had any insight or something comes to mind that you're it would just be helpful if you did this in regard to stuff like that, because then it would be something available to me. Because
if you did something, if you're trying, is that what you're
asking? Well, yeah, myself specifically, or the people that are trying to offer help and resources in the space who are just, it's over their head that they're not talking to everyone. They're not realizing that they're talking to everyone, me being them.
Honestly, it's looking at it from as intersectional as you can, especially with coursework or when I'm doing any type of like advocacy, I try to be as intersectional as I can. And obviously I'm not a perfect person, but it's trying to remember like, okay, how does this advice work and who can it apply to? And especially when we're looking at the adult industry, you know, especially myself as a Black sex worker, there's some advice that I can take and I can do every single bit of that advice, be consistent and stay on top of it, but still not succeed.
Last but not least, let's listen to the exclusive from our chat with Hunny Daniels.
And the fact of the matter is, too, I mean, we also can't pretend that, like, thin, white, privileged, conventionally attractive women aren't making more money than, like, queer folks and disabled folks and fat people and people of color. Like, I mean, that's also just everyone.
Everyone.
It's like, we can all see it, you know, it's clear everywhere. We can see it. And actually, when I first started sex work, I was not what I considered disabled. I'd been chronically ill my whole life since I was a very tiny child. But for most of my life, I kind of compensated in other ways. And a lot of that equaled me having days where I was just like completely put down. But I wasn't where I'm at now, which I do believe that short, well, it wasn't short, 5 years, that period of time that I really just like ignored all of my needs and I did what I needed to do to work. I don't drink anymore. I am sober from alcohol, but when I was camming, I drank a lot because it made me so much money. And it's so hard to sit there and not be making money, knowing that I could be making money. And I now am probably a little bit sicker than I maybe would have been at this point because for so many years, I drank so much on cam. And I sat in positions that were really hard on my body.
That's what I thought was hard about camming.
Oh my God, my knees, the cam girl knees. That's what I call them.
Yeah, my back, because I would like try to sit on my stomach and look up at the camera to like.
I was always on my knees. I was always sitting with my knees folded underneath me because it just makes your body look better. It's just a better silhouette. And I have fibromyalgia. So sitting in a position like that for hours on end, I would get off cam and I would just like, everything would hurt so bad. It would almost feel like coming down from an allergic reaction where I just have to sit there for like an hour and decompress because everything hurts. I feel gross. And don't get me wrong, like I did well at camming when I was doing well. But then when I wanted to stop drinking, when I started being sick a little bit more, people on cam were just like, they weren't cool with it. I was somebody that people wanted to get drunk. Like that was my role, is like, and I also ended up quitting because I realized everyone was kind of mean to me. But when I was drunk, I didn't realize that. I thought we were all in on the joke. And then being sober, I realized that they're actually just making fun of me. And I was like, I don't like this. And as an autistic person, it just became so hard to mask on cam when they were being mean to me and I wasn't drunk and all of these things. And camming just really started to feel inaccessible for me, just not something that I could do anymore.
We, as like sex workers, have had a lot of different types of experiences. We're very comfortable with our bodies. Or I mean, I can't speak for all sex workers, but like I'll speak from my perspective. Very comfortable with my body. Like I know how to do a lot of things. I am comfortable negotiating boundaries. Like there are a lot of people who are like, I don't know how to do that. And it's too high stakes, like in my relationships with people that I'm trying to date or that I'm in a relationship with or whatever. So I feel like that's a really great way that people use, like that people, a great reason to hire sex workers.
Or just like, talk to a sex worker. I can't tell you how many friends are like have spoke to me about like doing anal for the first time with their boyfriend, and he's in the story is like he just went for it. I was like, what? That is not how you do anal. There's a whole process. That's not how it goes.
Because people see it online, they see it in porn, and for some people they feel like, oh, I've seen it, I can do it. I personally don't have that confidence at all. But that happens a lot. Like I was saying with choking earlier, like some people really think you just like put your hand on the throat and squeeze. And it's like, baby, that is not how you do it.
That's a crushed windpipe. Yeah.
And I want so badly to know how to do things, to do them the quote unquote right way, because my autistic brain views things that way. Like there is a right way to do everything. I would like to know it.
Yeah.
And like people need the opportunity to do that. And I even personally, like everything that I put out there as a sex worker are things that like I want back in my life. I want in return in my life. Like I said, I've been in the kink community for so long, but there's still some things that I want to try, but I'm like, I don't want to try this with like a friend while we're like doing a scene and then maybe I'm not great at it. And like that, there's just so much anxiety when it comes to that.
Which is exactly what I did with the Hitachi scene.
Exactly.
I'm like, I don't know anything about this. Go ahead.
Circle. I want to ask too, like with your other disability, how does that impact? Because we talked a lot about autism and how that like comes into play with your work, but how does your other disabilities impact your sex work?
I mean, greatly, like very, very much. I cannot work the way other people work. I cannot, which means when I work, it has to be worth it. So unfortunately, my prices have to be what they are. I know a lot of people that feel like you have to earn your rates. You can't just go, but if I can only see so many clients in a month and I need to pay my bills, it has to even out. I go through periods of time where I cannot work. Like it doesn't matter if I want to, it doesn't matter if I need to, I can't. I had surgery in September. Like, what am I going to do about that? I had to have the surgery. I had to do it. It absolutely impacts my work. But it's just one of those things where it's like, this is my reality as a disabled person. My experience in sex work is really not that different from my experience of the world. Accessibility anywhere is kind of the same right now. People don't really think about it, which is, like I said, a lot of people think you're hiring a provider and they're just going to do it all for you. They're just like, and that's not, I can't. I feel like I physically can't do that. And I just, I can't offer like porn star experience, which I think it's a great seller. It's something that like...
Is that what it's called? Like people call that? That's a thing?
Yeah. So, and that would be a situation in which like somebody's saying, I don't want any emotional attachment. I don't want education. I just want like to get down and dirty and have fun.
Like a performance.
Yeah. I want to walk in and be fucking. Wow. Yeah.
Which I can't do.
Yeah.
Like I can't, I don't have good knees. I don't...
I think it's so interesting. Like this conversation is really interesting though, because for people who are like outside of sex work, I don't think that they realize that like people come to sex workers for all kinds of things. And like, there are people like who are going to be really like happy about the fact that like you're coming as you are, because it means that they can come as they are too.
Absolutely.
And there's something like really beautiful about that too. Like, this is who I am. This is what I have to offer. Do you want to partake in this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Unfortunately with that though, there's the con of like, if somebody doesn't want me and I'm presenting myself as I am, you have to be prepared for the fact that like, there are people who don't want you.
Right.
And as a disabled person, that sometimes it can get to you a little bit. You think like, was it this? Am I not good enough because of this?
Right.
But in reality, like not everybody is for everybody. And you kind of have to like take that to heart too, because I mean, the whole world doesn't give a shit about me. Like they do not care that I need accessibility places. So I understand that there are just people who are not going to want to be with me. Not going to want to hire me. And it sucks because I do see other people working so hard, people who go on month-long tours, people who are just like working. And I'm like, I want that, but I have to understand that that isn't who I am. And that isn't like a fault of mine, that I'm not that person. It can also be hard to like get other providers to take you seriously if you aren't somebody who's seeing high volume or who has a ton of money to put out on photo shoots and stuff like that. Like, I'm disabled. I only make so much money. I am relatively poor. I am going to come as I am because I don't want anybody to expect something different. And that means my photos are going to be the quality that they are. My lingerie is going to be comfortable, because if it's not comfortable, I'm not going to have fun, and I'm not great at hiding that. Like, it's just, being disabled is one of the things that honestly took a while to accept, is that, like, this is it. This is who I am. This is not changing. This is not going, I am not temporarily disabled. This is my life. So it's like trying to avoid that and keep doing things I can't do and keep taking work I can't take without burning out is not helpful. I have to accept, like, this is who I am. Everywhere I go, sex work, civ life, everything. This is my lot in life.
Yeah. I have to say, this conversation for me is so, like, one, educational, but also, like, transformative, because, like, my background is very much entrepreneurial, businesswoman to the core. I do put out courses for sex workers, not for paid anything. It's free. Take it if it works for you. Don't if it doesn't, because I don't want to take money from sex workers. I want to they should be making money. But, like, even hearing, because I've put out a tweet once. Someone had asked me, like, about my successes, and I'm like, what do you think is the thing that's made you the most successful? And my tweet back was that I do the things I do the thing even when I least want to do it, because, like, for me, overcoming, like, my laziness and my whatever and my stupid privileged challenges to do my job, like, that's what I put in, I guess, stake my success on, is like, I kept going and I did it even when I hated doing it. I did it. But then someone had replied to my tweet. They're like, this comment is really ableist. And I actually had to Google it because I didn't know what that meant. So, like, just very vulnerable moment here. I was like, oh, I'm an idiot. And, like, I was talking to people like myself. Obviously, that's my intent was that. Yeah. But when I'm putting a tweet out, I'm broadcasting it to the world. So it's not just the intentioned audience of
sex
people reading it.
It's sex workers it's such a vast spectrum of people.
So, like, even that, like, was such a reflective point for me, and, like, in this conversation makes me feel much like I felt then, because I'm like, okay, now, like, my goal with everything I've done course wise and with Sex Work CEO, with this podcast, everything is to educate and provide resources and help people be either more successful at what they do or make it fit their lives better or get the value out of it that's positive, essentially. And this conversation changes the way I reflect on that, because I'm like, okay, so the stuff I'm putting out and course-wise and all of that, it's great for people like me, but, like, I'm not doing anything for someone like you. Like, what can I do for someone who's disabled or has autism, or, like, what would be useful?
Honestly, I feel like engaging with more disabled people and, like, talking to them about how they work best, like, what's working for them. I feel like that's really helpful, because like you said, you are putting out information from your point of view, which means it's going to reach people like you and maybe not reach other people. So I feel like just the ways to do that is just, like, expanding the types of people who are, like, putting input on what you're doing. There are so many disabled sex workers who, I feel like, honestly, they do a lot of articles and stuff, which doesn't always reach people. So I definitely feel, and I've personally never seen a sex work course, free or not, that acknowledges disabled sex workers and what they're capable of doing. There's no section that's like, hey, I recognize, like, maybe you can't fucking do this. I just don't see that. And I see a lot of disabled people being like, what is happening in sex work right now is, like, I can't do it. I can't keep up. I can't do all the things that are required of me because other people are doing them. And there's one thing that I love reminding people of this, is that disability is not, it's not just for disabled people. Like, there are a lot of people now that are using the term pre-disabled for able-bodied people, because disability comes for us all. There's nobody in this world that will escape aging, and aging is a disability in its own. And it's really interesting. You were saying in your response to that tweet that you were saying, like, I push through when I feel lazy. I really, really challenge people to start questioning themselves as to whether or not what they're feeling is laziness, because I still even struggle with that. Like, I also have ADHD, so executive dysfunction out the wazoo. And there are moments where I'm like, God, I'm such a lazy piece of shit. Like, I should just be doing this. Like, why am I not doing this? There's a whole ass reason I'm not doing this. And it's not because I'm lazy. It's not because I don't want to. And I feel like there are a lot of people who view not working as laziness. It's like, you sometimes need a break. You sometimes can't do something, and that is okay. And I think that's a message that needs to be put out a lot more, is that like, if you can't fucking keep up, if you can't work today, if you can't do this task because you are just overwhelmed and you need to sit on the couch and stare at the wall, you're allowed to do that. And it's in fact, it's encouraged, because if you just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, you will hit a wall. And that wall might never go away. You might hit a wall one day, and then that's it. That's your experience. You might push yourself to the point. And that's kind of what my experience was, is I pushed myself until I couldn't push myself anymore. And now it's not even an option. I don't have the option to fight through it.
Something that you struck on too, with that, like, needing rest. That's something I recently really, like, that resonates with me, because I'm, again, that my background is business. So like, I very much rode in on the like Gary Vaynerchuk wave of like, you know, be a CEO and run your own business and work 1,000 hours a day. So like, I come from that, and I believed it. Like, I bought into the whole thing. But I also come from a family history of dementia and schizophrenia and extreme bipolar and manic depressive disorders. And I have anxiety. I've struggled with eating disorders. I know things aren't all tight and like nice and sorted up there. It's just, you know, one too good of weed away from slipping into oblivion. So when I think about like rest, I look at it so much differently now. And like, when I look back on that tweet, especially, and like saying that, because part of that, pushing through when I can push through, that's one thing, and that's great and fantastic. But now I'm like, if I don't schedule rest for myself, like I will have dementia. My husband will talk to an empty shell of myself. Like,
because we're all getting older. Like, we're all getting older. Like, you aren't young forever. You aren't going to have that stamina forever.
We might look like it, but it costs a lot of money.
It's the Botox. Because, and you know, like that, you know, I think about what I used to be able to do. That's not anywhere close to what I can do now. You know, I used to be able to do so much. And I really hope people understand that like, of course, people are like, oh, are you going to age out of sex work? Like, no, you don't have to age out of sex work. But you might become too physically disabled, too sick, you know, I have a lot of friends that didn't enter sex work sick or disabled, and now they just cannot work the way they used to work. And that is a reality. And I honestly believe the harder you go at this age, like the less you will have. You know, I tend to think of like human vitality as like, it's one amount.
Finite.
You aren't constantly revitalizing yourself. If anything, you're just depleting it. And it's like, if you want to have a life where you are not stuck in pain somewhere from running your body ragged when you were younger, you really have to make that time for rest. You have to make time for moving your body, for moving your eyeballs. If you've been staring at a screen for 5 hours, you know, like, I sit in one spot a lot. Like, and it's important to make sure you're comfortable, make sure you're supported, like back supports. Like, there's just a lot that I never thought at 29 I would be thinking about. And here I am having to think about it. And I just hope that other people realize, like, this will happen to you. Like, whether it's a year from now or 20 years from now, you need to have the skills to rest. And that sounds so silly, but
no, it's actually true. And it's like a really good place to end, I think, on that note of like recognizing that we are all pre-disabled. I actually think that's a good way to say it. And that we don't have unlimited like resources, like
human capital.
We can't just go forever.
We hope you enjoyed this bonus footage from this episode of On the Horizon, and we look forward to having you tune in next time.